I'm Asif Farouk and this is Finextra at Cybos. We're joined here today by Manfred Joseph of SAP. Thank you for joining us. So banks are often guilty of not really taking advantage on the wealth of client data that they have available. How can big data be used by bankers to access client data on the go?
So big data analysis tools do a lot of good stuff on all the massive amounts of data that we have today. And we in SAP, we do a lot of that stuff all the time. However, if you look in what we are doing here, most of the time we aggregate, we consolidate, we move into various data layers of data warehouses. We then report against these data warehouses, either overnight or the next day or sometimes even later. And bringing that time down obviously is a good thing. However, it never results in what I would call a real-time scenario. So we at SAP have a different view at that. We think it is important to bring not only the time down to report against those data warehouses, but to bring it together with the transactions itself. Typically in the past we would have separated those two things. We would have a transactional system and then we would have a system against we report, which then creates the time lag. So we want to bring that together to be real time. We do this in our HANA in-memory appliance, and that is where the real power of real time comes in. Let me give you an example of that. If you were to get your bonus this month, and it would be a nice big bonus, and you would go to your bank and you would deposit that money, wouldn't it be great if the bank would immediately realize that what you have deposited here is, say, more than double of what you would on average deposit at the bank? So they would realize that something extraordinary has happened. They would be able to flag an operator, and that operator would be able to call you and ask you whether you want to move that particular amount of money into a savings account, selling you additional products. Now, in order to be able to do that, of course, you need to search massive amounts of data, all the transactions that have happened over the last, say, 5 years in order to count that average. And that, of course, needs a particular technology that allows you to do that kind of stuff, which is what our in-memory appliance, in fact, does. That example, by the way, is not just a theoretical example, but that is typically a concrete example of one of our customers. And the funny, there's even a little bit of a funny story behind that, because when they actually did that, and the customers got called shortly after they deposited the money, the customers got a little bit spooked by the fact that somebody, would call them immediately. So they had to put in a time lag of 2 hours in order to, not to make their customers too worried about who is watching them. I think this must be the only time ever IT has to be slowed down in order to fulfill a business requirement. So that's one big part. The other big part, if you think about it, there are, banks possess a lot of information about their customers. There's probably no industry that knows more from the data about their customers than the financial services industry, and banks in particular. But there is unfortunately not a lot of concept as to how to monetize that information. Nobody has tried this in a very serious way in the past, because also partially the technology was missing to be able to do that. Of course, you cannot report on this on an individual basis, but you can report of it in an aggregate form. Just think about a retailer who would want to know what the spending patterns of their customers are, say a particular age group, a particular geography, in order to focus their marketing accordingly. So there are some customers out there who would even be willing to pay money for that if the banks would only be able to provide them that kind of information. So this is another area where real-time data analytics plays a very significant role going forward.
And do you think the benefits of the cloud outweigh the security concerns and perhaps the loss of control?
So first of all, I don't think that security could be sacrificed in favor of reduced cost. So no matter what the potential positive impact in terms of cost reductions are, security always has been, is, and will always be the major concern of banks when it comes to data of their customers. But security has also come a long way. So that's not something that is on the same level as it used to be. And of course there is massive possibility for cost reduction. I don't think the cost reduction per se comes from putting a particular isolated business process onto the cloud. That will result in some reduction, but it's not going to be the lion's share. I think the real cost reduction comes from bringing a particular end-to-end process either completely onto the cloud or have part of that process running on-premise, part of that process running in a private cloud, part of that process running in a public cloud, and orchestrating that process across those three delivery channels. This is, I think, where the big saving comes, and this is where we also focus on in SAP. But I don't think it is only about cost reduction per se. There's also two other benefits that I think come with the cloud. One, it is the extension of the business network for companies. Just think about one example, Ariba, which is an SAP company, and their procurement network, on the one hand reduces the cost, but on the other hand also extends the business network of their customers to a lot of suppliers, to a lot of customers, something they would otherwise normally not get access to in an isolated fashion. And number three, there's also the time to value that plays a role, because bringing up a cloud solution, typically is a matter of days and weeks, rather than your traditional IT project where you talk about months and sometimes years. So the time to value, which eventually also has impact on cost and growth, plays another important role.
So corporations increasingly want to connect to all their banks using one single SWIFT standard. How can technology make this a simple and seamless process?
So indeed, corporations have a multitude of banking relationships, and what makes their world relatively complex and expensive is the point-to-point connections that they have with each of their banks. What they really want is one secure connection that links them not only to a particular bank but to all their banking suppliers, and with whom they work and transact on a daily basis. At SAP we have developed what we call the Financial Services Network, which is a cloud-based solution where we give both the corporations as well as the banks a possibility to use an intelligent agent to connect with that cloud application and provide them a single secure interface to make banking business with their various counterparts. So if you look at that, the interest of the bank is to make a banking relationship as seamless as possible and as easy and simple as possible, and the corporates have the exactly opposite view to that. They also want that, but they want to be able to connect very quickly to their banks. Now, the second major objective is for them to bring costs down, because frankly payments become more and more a commodity type transaction. So bringing cost down, I think, is a key element. But it is not an area where banks typically can differentiate very well from their competitors. It's just something they need to do. It's something where they need to provide a service. But in order to differentiate, they need other services. So the financial services network allows the banks not only to transact payments with their customer, but then also to provide value-added services over that same connection that then differentiate them from their competitors and set them apart. So that's what the basic idea between the financial services network is: give them a very, very secure and cheap connection to transact payments, and at the same time provides a platform for them to differentiate against their competitors.